What's going on, everybody? Travis Fowler, Harkrider, back again this week with yet another edition of Tights and Turnbuckles. So you know what time it is. It's time to talk pro wrestling, and let's jump right into it with our in-ring reviews, because this week there was a lot of notable moments that took place almost on all fronts, from WWE's Raw, SmackDown, and NXT to TNA to AEW Dynamite. There was a lot of cool things and great moments that took place during this week. We'll start with Raw because it had some great things take place to lead in for this upcoming week's Raw. The main focus, though, on Raw was the main event. Jey Uso and Braun Breaker for the Intercontinental Championship. And my opinion, I thought it delivered. I thought it did everything that it was meant to do. And Jey Uso, man, I would almost say that you could compare his momentum to the same of what Daniel Bryan had back in 2014 going into WrestleMania with the authority angle and everything from basically SummerSlam of 2013 to WrestleMania 30 in 2014. That same type of fan engagement and that same fan appreciation, I feel like Jey Uso actually has at this point, and he capitalized on it and has ever since he got to break away and be this solo star. This was his coming out party, and he captured the Intercontinental title, which over the last couple of years has regained its prestige that had been lost to it for a few years, and on and off again it would get that same kind of notoriety, but now we've seen it consistently take place. We've seen it put into big-time matches, been put on to what most believe are going to be world champion caliber stars. I mean, you look at Gunther, who was the longest reigning IC champion now with 666 days. He's now the world champion. Sami Zayn, who I believe is going to get a world title reign here sooner rather than later, he was Intercontinental Champion. He was the one that dethroned Gunther. Then we move on to Braun Breaker. Most people feel, myself included, he's a future world champion. And I think Jey Uso fits that same category. So we've seen the workhorse title come back to its prominence, at least on that Raw front. And I feel like they're working with the U.S. title in that same focus, especially with that feud of Carmelo Hayes, Andrade, and LA Knight, which we'll get to here in just a moment. But yeah, I think this was a great time for Jey Uso to get that title. I think they made the right decision. I honestly didn't think they would. I felt like maybe the 51-day reign was too short for Breaker, but I've read a report, and I actually said this to a friend of mine, that I think the reason they went the route they did was because they can tell that Breaker, as much as they were trying to push him as this dominant heel, you could almost say on a Brock Lesnar-esque kind of trajectory, fans are buying into him, and they enjoy him. They enjoy doing the hoof, 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 they enjoy the bark, they enjoy his character. So I feel like he's kind of going not in the Brock Lesnar route, but perhaps one would say, obviously not with an undefeated streak, but having more of that Goldberg personality take place. So I think it was a great move to get the title off of him. He'll rebound. There is no question about that. And Jey Uso got his shine. He got his moment, and it's well deserved. So I look forward to seeing what happens in this Intercontinental title reign for him. Then on NXT, while this wasn't an NXT that I would say had a lot of good matches, like there were, I'm not going to say they're bad, but it wasn't a match-focused card. It was more so a build-up to this upcoming week's NXT, which is their debut on the CW network. They just kind of put the final edges on their rivalries that they're booking to go into the CW premiere. We saw the interactions with CM Punk talking to Trick Williams and to Ethan Page, but most importantly, we saw the closing segment between Roxanne Perez and Julia, which I didn't see this coming, but for them to end their press conference promo with Stephanie Vacour showing up on the Titantron behind them and just doing kind of the stare off between the two of them with her picture in the background in the middle was genius work. So we know what they're trying to build for there. NXT's women's roster, Shawn Michaels has said, is the best women's roster all around. I would at least say that it is the best women's roster in some time. I would even argue in all of WWE right now. So I think he's got a point. Whether it's overall, that might be debatable. But I feel like he has at least a valid point to say this has been one of the best women's rosters that NXT has seen to date, and that does include the Four Horsewomen era of NXT. Then we move over to Dynamite, which was their Grand Slam event, and it started off a 30-minute commercial-free match between Bryan Danielson and Nigel McGuinness. I'm not going to sit here and say that I was a purist and had known about these two and their magical matches that took place in Ring of Honor back in the late 2000s, early 2010s, I believe also. I'm not going to be that guy. But I saw enough of the video packages and, of course, did my own research online to see that these two had a history. And you obviously could hear it on Nigel's commentary, which has been superb when it came to building up the tension between these two in this match. And I think the match delivered in what it was supposed to do. I definitely feel like it was more of a nostalgia match to really just cater to that hardcore fan base that remembers those classic matches between the two of them from their Ring of Honor days. So in that sense, it did what it was supposed to do there, and it delivered from an in-ring point too. I think they both did a spectacular job. I love the ending of Nigel thanking Daniel Bryan good Lord. I just pulled a JR, called him Daniel Bryan. I think it was great that Nigel McGuinness gave him the thank you to Bryan Danielson, because, Daniel Bryan's another lifetime ago. I thought it was a great match overall. I really do feel that these two did what they were supposed to do, and it satisfied the fans. And then you fast forward to the end of the show. I know there was some stuff notably that maybe some would want to talk about, like the tag title match, which was good. I had my own thoughts on at least one spot that took place, but it's nothing that I need to go into because people have heard what my feelings are about certain spots and issues with them. But I'm not going to take away from the overall match. It was still a very entertaining match. The FTW title finally is being retired, and I think that's been long overdue. That's no offense to anybody that held it. I just never really got the idea of having a, quote, unrecognized title being recognized. It makes no sense. It's an oxymoron. So then we get to the end of the show, which was Jon Moxley versus Darby Allin, the winner going to Wrestle Dream and being the number one contender to face Bryan Danielson for the AEW title. There were plenty of rumors going into Grand Slam even stating that they felt Darby was going to be the guy to take on Bryan Danielson and beat him, essentially retiring him and becoming the AEW World Champion. Obviously, things had changed, and then it got to this point, Moxley and Allin. And while some question how they did it, myself included, it is what it is, and that's what we got. They had a good match as well, with Darby taking some serious bumps that made me just be like, godly, I don't know how this guy is going to be able to have a successful wrestling career in the next decade. We thought Jeff Hardy did crazy things, and especially that whole TLC bunch that did what they did back in the early 2000s. I tell you, some of the stuff that Darby has done just really makes me go, holy crap, this kid is just literally looking to break his neck or die in some of these instances. But it was a good match, great match between two guys that kind of had a predictable ending. I kind of felt like Moxley was going to go this way, especially with them goading Allin basically into taking this number one contenders match when he already had his title shot secured. But Moxley picking up the win with the Avalanche Death Rider. The attack from Bryan after the match was a really good spot. And I actually do think you're going to see another classic between these two, similar to what they did at the AEW Revolution pay-per-view when William Regal debuted. Only this time, you've got the title on the line, and they're definitely going a more personal route and a rivalry between these two. So good things there. Plus, we get the Ricochet Will Ospreay match this upcoming week on Dynamite. And I also want to bring up something after we finish this in-ring review about Raw and SmackDown and some of the matches that they've been promoting over this last week. But let's head into TNA real quick because TNA had a couple of notable moments as well. The debut of the formerly known Xia Li, who is now going by Lai Ying Li over in TNA. I always felt she was an underrated wrestler and thought that they could have done more with her in WWE. So I'm happy that she actually went to TNA and is going to get a chance, I think, to shine brightly over there. I've loved her in ring work. I think her character, for the most part, had always been solid. So I very much look forward to seeing what she does as a TNA knockout. Then the main event of Joe Hendry taking on Frankie Kazarian, with the winner becoming the number one contender for the TNA heavyweight title at Bound for Glory and facing Nick Nemeth. I honestly thought they were going to go the traditional face heel route, and Kazarian, who's been calling himself the king of TNA, I thought they would put him in the position to become just that and give him the world title match against Nick Nemeth. And boy, was I wrong, because they continued to go with the Joe Hendry momentum, and he is now the number one contender to face Nick Nemeth at Bound for Glory, their biggest show of the year. And man, I honestly think that they might pull that trigger finally and put the title on Joe Hendry. He would be very deserving of it. And if it's your biggest show, if this is your quote WrestleMania each year, which is what Bound for Glory has always been built as for TNA, absolutely, this is the time. Pull the trigger, put the title on Hendry, and then have him show up on NXT on a CW episode with that title. Sounds like good business for everybody all around. Then on SmackDown, we saw the return of the Bloodline, with Solo leading the Pact, goading Randy Orton and Kevin Owens into a tag match main event. And we started to also see the breakdown. And I had been saying that I felt like that Kevin Owens match with him and Cody at Bash in Berlin was just going to be the start of what would be a defining rivalry for Cody's title reign. Because there had been many people that are like, well, it's been subpar, the matches have been good, but really it's the same story. I respect you as an in-ring worker, but I'm still going to beat you, yada, yada, yada. These next title defenses that you're going to see out of Cody Rhodes is going to really, I think, spell out his overall title reign. And I honestly would say it's going to make it an earmarked success. I do feel like his rivalry with Kevin Owens is about to go personal and go that heel face route. Roman is right there, and even though Rhodes and Roman are in that Rock Austin esque rivalry, if you will, I was very, very upfront last week stating that I feel like that's the type of rivalry we have for this generation, is Rhodes Roman being this generation's Austin Rock. There's a lot of speculation that's going to be the match for Crown Jewel in Saudi Arabia. Wouldn't have a problem with that, because they, even though are both now faces, you can tell, and they've done a great job character-wise of keeping a tension between the two of them. And it is clear to see that there is going to be a divide of your Roman fans and your Cody fans. And now that you can cheer for both, it's going to be a fun match to see. I think you've got Randy Orton waiting in the wings, but I still think that's going to be saved more closer to Mania. There was a report that said that it's not a guarantee that Cody's holding that title all the way to Mania, so who knows what can happen, especially with Bad Blood coming up here next weekend. A lot of good things going on there. The match between Andrade and Carmelo Hayes, also, great match. Number 6, now they're tied up, and it's almost gone into a best of 7 situation, which I'm a fan of. It kind of gives me a call back to the old WCW Nitro days and the classic best of 7 between Benoit and Booker T. But I saw somewhere where I think somebody kind of hit the nail on the head. Make it a triple threat. Put the title on the line with these 3. And I think it would be money. I think it could work, especially now that they seemingly have injected LA Knight into a personal vendetta with both of them. Let's go ahead and just do the 3-way for the title. I think it would be a great matchup between 3 great workers. You saw the tension start building up with Nia and Tiffany Stratton. Some even think that we could see a cash in of that Money in the Bank as soon as Bad Blood. I don't think we're going to get that quite yet. I think they're going to let that burn a little bit longer. But honestly, I've said it to a couple people, including my fiance. I really just hope we get to the point where it's Stratton and Flair at Mania for the women's title, because I think that match is going to be unbelievably good. But all of that said, coming into this week, like we said, Bad Blood is this Saturday at a very early start time than normal, which I am perfectly okay with. But I wanted to talk about something that I think people are, for whatever reason, are now complaining about. And honestly, I have a different take on this. I've seen people kind of complain about how on Monday, tomorrow night, for instance, or I should say tonight, since this is dropping on Monday, we have what they are pegging the last monster standing match between Big Bronson Reed and Braun Strowman. The work that these two have been putting in has been amazing. Seeing Bronson Reed get his momentum back after it was quickly halted due to his illness back in February and missing out on that title opportunity with Seth Rollins at Elimination Chamber. I'm glad that they were finally able to work him back in the fold, because this stuff with Braun Strowman, which he's returned to his form as well as being that unstoppable monster that we saw back in like 2018 when his momentum was at the top level and could have been champion high, maybe even 2019. I may have been wrong on my year there, but either way, I feel like we've now hit that momentum again with Braun Strowman, and these two are going to face off. And then on Friday, we had the announcement that we're going to have the triple threat ladder match for the tag team titles featuring DIY, the champions, the Bloodline in the form of Tonga Loa and Tama Tonga, and the Street Profits. And I have people saying, man, why aren't they just, putting this on the pay-per-view? Why are they putting it on free TV? Well, also, before I go into my explanation, let's not forget that NXT's CW debut seemingly is going to be main evented with two main events, essentially. You've got Ethan Page and Trick Williams, who have done very good about building up their rivalry for the NXT title, but there is an argument to be made that the main event is really going to be Roxanne Perez versus Julia, and that's on free TV as opposed to doing one of their PLEs. I don't have an issue with this because, as we've seen, the PLEs have now started being a more exclusive card with very few matches. 5 to 6 is what I've seen recently. I'm always okay, and I've said before that I think 7 is the perfect number. But 5 or 6 is okay as well, depending on what the rivalries are going into the pay-per-views, or the PLEs in this case. So getting matches that still have a personal feel, like the Last Monster Standing, like the three-way ladder match where there's been a little bit of a history build up between these two, putting this on live TV for your Raw and SmackDown or your weekly shows in general. Even AEW is guilty of this. You're putting Ricochet and Will Ospreay on free TV next week. Every time you do that, I don't think there's an issue with having a minimal card when you're delivering top-notch main events like that on the weekly television show. It just makes that product that much more important to tune into. It makes you see that Raw and SmackDown can still be a show that presents big-time moments and big-time matches. Jey Uso and Braun Breaker showed that just this past week. So I don't have a problem with it, and I very much do believe that it is a great thing to do, is to have your exclusive PLEs, and you can still blow off rivalries and have big matches, big stipulation matches on your weekly TV when it's done correctly and when there has been at least a little bit of a build-up to warrant said stipulation or said big-time match. Now, that's just a little gripe that I had there. Let's kind of move on to something that has more positivity to it. Returns are starting to become in season. This past Monday on Raw, we saw a vignette appear that had people wondering, well, is this a sign of the Lucha Brothers vignette coming? And no, when I saw it, I immediately knew who it was. And WrestleVotes has also, I believe through WrestlePurist as well, has said something about that vignette is clearly for the Viking Raiders return. If you look up I forget what the type of language it was in, but the symbols that were on that shield-esque design spelled out war. And that led to a report coming out that when the Viking Raiders do make their return, which both have been medically cleared to come back to pro wrestling and the Raw or SmackDown brand, WWE, however you want to look at it, they're clearly going to be on Raw. They're going to be rebranded back to their NXT tag team name, which I personally enjoy, the War Raiders. I thought it was a great mix between WWE not going with the War Machine name, but still giving them what they originally felt like. And it also makes me wonder, does that mean they're going to go back to their original names of Hanson and Rowe? Because I always liked that better than I did Eric and Ivar. There's a lot of questions that have still yet to be answered, but I am so here for the return of hopefully back to Hanson and Rowe, the War Raiders. Only time will tell how we're going to get that presented to us, but we did see also over the weekend at an NXT house show, Nikita Lyons has made a return to the ring after suffering another injury. She is now going to be back in the fold. I bet we see something of her on the CW NXT premiere this upcoming Tuesday. So while we have returns coming, we also still have other contract things coming up, such as Malachi Black, who reportedly we had heard signed a 5-year deal with AEW, which would have been back in 21. So he would have been good for the AEW roster all the way till 26. But apparently through Raj Giri, I think I may have pronounced his name wrong there, and if I did, my apologies. He had a report earlier this week stating that apparently it wasn't 5 years and that his contract could actually be coming up as soon as early next year. And WWE is interested in bringing him back. Plus, his wife, Zelina Vega, is still on that roster as well. And I feel like Malachi Black, if he were to come back under even the Aleister Black name, he was always a Triple H baby as well. He was treated great in NXT, and I think he would be a big priority to get back into WWE. He had a great character. People loved it. People loved him as a worker. I do believe Aleister or Malachi Black, whatever he chooses to go by, whatever they go with, if they were to get him back, is going to be a huge success in WWE if he so chooses to go back. Now, there was one thing I wanted to talk about, and it had to deal with some controversy that went on, and it deals with the Lucha Brothers, specifically Rey Fenix. There was a report through Wrestling Observer, so take it for what it's worth, earlier in the week stating that indeed Tony Khan is going to place time on Rey Fenix's contract due to injury. And I even tweeted this out on my own X account stating that I do feel like this was a very Vince move by Tony Khan, if it is indeed true. And if he is tacking time on to Rey Fenix's contract due to injury, that's very low. I even feel that way with WWE. So it's not like I'm biased towards WWE. I truly do feel like this is a situation that should never be the case. Injuries happen in wrestling, and you shouldn't be essentially punishing somebody for getting injured and tacking time on, especially if they don't want to be there anymore. I don't understand the idea of keeping somebody out of spite just because you can. You know, if they don't want to be there anymore, then let them go. You know, same for WWE. If you don't want a wrestler on your roster, let them go explore other options and see what they can do on their own. Maybe they will find out that the grass is indeed greener, or maybe it's not on the other side. But I just don't see the idea of putting time on a person's contract for an injury involved in a sport where injuries are very much likely to occur at any given moment. And it's essentially punishing the talent, especially if you don't plan to use the talent because of that spitefulness, which I feel like could be the case, is that he just tacks on the time and then does nothing with Rey. That's a waste of his time. That's a waste of his money. That is a waste of Rey Fenix's time. And I just don't think there's any upside to that practice whatsoever. Like I said, didn't like it when WWE would do it. I don't like it when any company does it. I don't like it that AEW could potentially be doing that as well. But again, that's just a rumor that has not been confirmed. So that is something that is yet to be seen. Only time will tell if that is indeed the case and has happened. Hopefully it hasn't, and hopefully it is just that, a rumor sparked, which wouldn't be the first, by Dave Meltzer. But finally, one last piece of business before we get out of here. Anybody else see that picture tweeted out by the Young Bucks on, I believe it was Friday? Yeah, if you know what I'm talking about, it was quite the shock. But at the same time, is it really? Considering what we've seen with Tony Khan and this gentleman, the picture of the Young Bucks with the quote, "interesting flight," as the caption for a photo with Shane McMahon. This is just fueling rumors and speculation even more, even with myself included. I think it's only a matter of time before we see Shane McMahon walk through the doors of AEW. I truly believe that there is something to this whole Moxley gimmick where he's saying that this isn't your show anymore, this isn't your company anymore. I think there's something brewing, and I do think Shane McMahon might be something or someone behind this whole Jon Moxley heel character we've seen recently. We saw the picture make the rounds with Shane and Tony Khan. Now we see it with the Bucks. Only time will tell if there is indeed anything that comes from them, but I think it's very safe to speculate that there has at least been a conversation had that could see Shane O'Mac show up on AEW television. I mean, they potentially have a deal in place with WBD, which has yet to be announced, but I think it's only a matter of time before we hear it. Swerve was out earlier this week stating that he for sure knows that they're going to have a deal on Fox coming up with another show, so that hasn't been confirmed either, so only time tells there as well. But if all that is correct, then that means you've got to have something big lined up for all of these big scenarios that are about to take place for your company. Shane McMahon, a McMahon in a opposing wrestling company, would definitely be a way to make an impact with your company, especially after you've potentially signed a long-term deal with WBD and potentially a new deal with Fox. What better way than to introduce the money, Shane O'Mac, to what could be a big money move to the AEW audience? Guys, that's what I got for you this week. What do you think about all these stories we've talked about? Do you think it's a matter of time before we see Shane McMahon show up in AEW? And how do you feel about big time matches being presented to us on free TV, Raw, SmackDown, AEW, whatever the case? Let me know in those comments down below. Also, make sure, if you haven't already, subscribe to that YouTube channel. It helps us out, as I say every single week. Make sure you're following us on all of our social media sites. Facebook, under the Four Corner Podcast banner, still having issues getting that changed. I may have to actually just create a new page for this podcast with the new name. We're also on X, we're on Instagram, and we're also on TikTok. So make sure you're following us on all our platforms there. I always enjoy being able to take this little bit of time to talk wrestling with this audience. I appreciate your passion and I love the engagements. So please hit me up with any of your thoughts or questions that you might have after listening to this episode. And I will be back next week once again to talk about professional wrestling. But until that time, y'all have a great week ahead and continue to love pro wrestling.